Yeah, happy to start. So I'm Patrick Maher. I'm one of the co-chairs for the SAEM24 Program Committee Didactic Subcommittee. Wendy Sun is my co-chair. And thank you everyone for coming here. We're here to talk about submitting a winning didactic. And it's increasingly a challenging proposal. There's an increasing number of didactic submissions every year, and we are very proud of the ones that get to be submitted and presented, and here to try and help you get your best chance. We'll go on to the next slide. So the mission of SAEM is to lead the advancement of emergency care through education, research, advocacy, and professional development in academic emergency medicine. The kind of submissions that we get, the best submissions will encompass this mission. And we'll talk about a specific facet of the kind of things that people who attend the SAEM conference are interested in hearing. We'll go on to the next slide. But as a general overview, so just to give you an idea of the kind of things that are submitted and the kind of things that are accepted, when you submit a didactic to SAEM as a conference, you get a choice of whether this is a 20 versus a 50-minute didactic summary session. The goal for all of these is that they be interactive. Not everything has to be like a discussion, nothing has to be like a small group session, although we do get quite a few of those, and often those are very successful submissions. The rate of acceptance that we have has gone down over the past several years, and it's because of an increasing number of submissions to the conference. And so for the past year, we had 153 acceptances and 373 submissions. This is actually up roughly about 100 submissions as opposed to SAEM 21. And we do expect that this upcoming year will likely break this number again. For any kind of, oh, sorry, go backwards. For any kind of submission which is being proposed for SAEM, it's worthwhile considering whether this is best submitted as a didactic or whether you should consider the other kind of categories that we have. So not only are there didactics, but also innovations, which is useful for something which is, something more of like a personal project or something that's like a single center description still, but something which you really want to present to everyone. And innovations is a good way to do that. Abstracts, which of course is more useful for something which you've done as a study, which you were interested in talking about your own personal data, or Ignite sessions, which are fast paced and focused on something which is, really going to be very interesting to an audience and also kind of a smaller focus format. Then it's also worthwhile to remember that the things that are submitted to SAEM that are successful are those that are soarable. So SOAR is the SAEM online academic resources. Essentially something which we record all the sessions and later post them to the online content. So any kind of didactic which is submitted, a best one will be something which would later be, viewable or memorable to the audience that might want to see it in a delayed fashion too. I have here also the hashtag SAEM24 deadlines for submission, which is 10/2/23 and 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. And definitely not something to forget because after that, they are completely closed. Go to the next slide. So two kinds of didactic types which we will allow to be submitted. A focused session for 20 minutes. Usually these are one or two speakers. Often any kind of didactic that you propose could be presented in a 20-minute session. The amount of 20-minute sessions is roughly equal that we get submitted to the 50-minute sessions. And likewise, the amount of acceptances that we have for 20 and 50 is generally even. So there's not, I think, an advantage of submitting it as a 20 or as a 50, but rather just that like the content of the didactic itself should determine whether this is best served by a 20 or best served by a 50. The 50-minute sessions, usually these are expanded sessions. And so we talk about, a very successful 50-minute session having a little bit more content, a little bit more meat, as opposed to a 20-minute session. Usually have a lot of interactivity and a good breadth of content. These are the usual panel presentation format as a 50-minute session. Often a lecture that takes 50 minutes will have like a very meaty kind of substance or like a really topic that would never be done justice in a 20-minute session. Or things like an interactive workshop with small group facilitators. If that's too big to facilitate in a 20-minute session, a 50-minute session is more appropriate in that case. Some interactive workshops are more appropriate for like pre-meeting sessions. And if it's going to be something which we don't even think could be done justice in 50 minutes, then that will often receive a low score and will also not be presented, however. If you are still thinking of ideas for submission and context for your own submission to SAEM24, it's useful to go through past years. So we have links in our best practices document, which when you open up the submission website, we'll give you a link to. And then those will give you links to the ones that were accepted for SAEM22 and SAEM23. So these are, a really great place to start for things that have already been presented that are similar in your field. If you're thinking of presenting something, it's not the case that something which was presented will necessarily be rejected. It's also not the case that something which was similar to something which was presented will necessarily be accepted. But just to kind of brainstorm ideas, I think that those are very useful to go through. We do have a record of everything which was submitted to every SAEM conference. We are able to make that available to certain kind of groups on demand, but we have not made that information public as yet. It's useful if you're still brainstorming also to consider, whether you should get some help from other committees or anyone else in your field. In our most recent conference in SAEM23, of all of the didactics that were submitted, amongst the acceptances, 77% had some association of a sponsorship. So that whether that was an academy or a specific committee or an interest group, more often than not, far more often than not, they had some sort of a sponsorship rather than no sponsorship at all. So getting a sponsorship by one of these groups is a tremendous win in the chance to get accepted and presented, because it shows that somebody has looked over it and somebody has agreed that this is of interest, and kind of guarantees almost that you've got a little bit of an audience for your own didactic when it comes into the conference. It also is useful to consider whether this adheres to the educational mission, the first slide that we had in this presentation, of SAEM in general. If it's not going to adhere to the educational mission, then it's really not useful to the attendees to the conference. When you get help also from one of these committees or the other kind of groups in the field, the academies and the interest groups, a lot of them will actually be able to provide some didactic vetting. So, for instance, the research committee, if you submit it to them, they'll actually look over your didactic proposal. They'll give you feedback on it. They'll decide whether this would be of interest to their members, and then maybe even give you a little bit of membership to improve the didactic, and all of that will go towards getting an acceptance when it's actually submitted. Other ideas for submission for a new didactic proposal would include things like hot topics and controversies. If it's a more obvious hot topic in the field of emergency medicine, this will frequently receive quite a few submissions. Examples would be post-Roe and our most recent conference, which did receive quite a few didactic proposals. But if it's a hot topic that you think is interesting, and if you think you have a particular bent on it that people would be interested to hear, then I think that that's worth submitting. And then lastly, the submission pool does vary year to year. So this is something that it's worth considering, that didactic proposals that might be submitted perennially will have different chances of being accepted year to year, depending on what their competition is that year.
All right, so here is kind of what the submission portal looks like. This is a QR code taking you to the submission portal, and on the first page, you'll have the opportunity to start a new submission. And so what it'll require you to do is, put in a title, and it's okay that you don't have, your formal full title set, because you can go back to revise it before your final submission date. And then at the kind of bottom of it, you'll have the opportunity to specify that you want this talk to be a didactic. So once you press submit, you'll be taken over to kind of the second page of the portal, where you have the opportunity to list your presenters, submit financial disclosures, and then input description of your didactic, as well as learning objectives and some additional details regarding your didactic. And when you enter to each of the specific part for presenters, you'll need to have things as your presenter's email, because the presenters will be notified that they're on your didactic, and then conflicts of interest and disclosure form will also be sent to them so that they can complete it before the deadline. And so kind of the most important part is finding a topic to present your didactic on. So it's important to keep in mind that you'll be presenting to an audience of both experts and learners, and your didactic should appeal widely, even if you're covering a niche topic. And much like a research manuscript, high quality didactic should define the problem and state its importance before delving into your insights or arguments. Your talk should also be inviting to learners and also substantive for experts as well. And in coming up with your title, the title is what grabs the attention of the SAEM attendees. And so, when they're looking through that program map, it is the title that will bring the, attendee to star your didactic and really draw them to it. So when thinking about a title, it's important to capture, what you'll be talking about, but not only that, it's always helpful to make it catchy as well. So as you can see on the screen, these are a couple of, good examples of titles of successful didactics from previous years. And then so next for objectives. So you want your objectives to be specific and as well as detailed. When a didactic grader is looking through them, they should be able to see the high value that your didactic will bring. So again, we have a couple examples on this PowerPoint slide of kind of a good objective to put for a didactic. And as you're formulating these didactics, it's often helpful to kind of formulate it upon kind of the phrase, like, upon completion of the didactic, participant will be able to, and then insert an action verb, and then kind of then list out, what you want your attendees to take away. To give you some guidance on this, to the QR code on our right, that links to our best practices guide. And at the very last page, you'll have many synonyms of, action words that would, help you write out these objectives if you need a starting point. And so for each didactic, you could put up to 3 to 5 objectives, but every didactic should have at least 3.
Yeah, and those didactics, I can say, are always best structured in that active voice kind of describe, question. There's a kind of a logical list of these verbs which are always used for the didactic objectives. Next we wanted to talk about the didactic description. So this is, I can't downplay the importance of that topic and the title for whether a didactic is successful or not. But the description is going to be something which a lot of the scores for the didactic, which are individually scored by a number of volunteers for whether these are going to be accepted or not. A lot of this is going to be coming from the description of the didactic that's generated. So this is limited on our submission site to 300 words. So that's usually 1 to 3 sentences. Of course, you could stretch it depending on how well you can write. Upon the background information, so why this topic is important, the content, what you'll be presenting and how, and then the objectives. And not the objectives in the sense that we just talked about, but the kind of what your audience should take away from the didactic. There are many examples if you wanted to look to these on the websites or in previous submissions. And, this is going to be just like what hooks you in, how this is feasible, why should somebody attend this, what makes our didactic different. Unfortunately, we don't allow any figures or tables. I know this is different for some abstract submissions, but for didactics, no figures, no tables. And you've just got to provide like a little bit of context, justification, maybe even controversy, something that's going to interest people, make this sound feasible, presentable, fittable in your time frame, but also something which is going to be attendable. We'll go next slide.
So the next slide, I think I skipped over the previous slide. There we go. So in terms of plan, this is really important because it will help the graders and also your attendees understand what kind of didactic or the format will be. So it's really important to break it down in terms of kind of having timeframes of the different activities you want to do during your didactic, as well as being specific. So again, we have 2 examples, one of a 15-minute roundtable didactic, another of a 20-minute didactic. As you can see in the 15-minute example, the person who submitted did an excellent job breaking down, for leaving 5 minutes for introductions, 20 minutes for the first part of the roundtable discussion, 2 minutes to switch. Accounting for that switch time where your participants are moving around is really kind of important in keeping the didactic within the 15-minute allotted time, and and then specifying another 20-minute roundtable and then 3-minute wrap up. And then as you can see from the 20-minute example, that's more of a kind of classic presentation kind of order of exactly what our presenters are going to talk about.
Yeah, and Wendy, just to point out too that this planned section can be used, in a specific way as you feel would benefit your didactic proposal. For this 20-minute didactic, I think a good example of something which was this is an actual example of an accepted didactic, something where they wanted to talk about something for 20 minutes, and they really did break down their topics actually more specifically than this in their actual submission. This 50-minute didactic, submission, more general, but also if it was something that was pretty clear in your plan of what you were going to talk about and your description of what you were going to talk about, I don't think you'd need to make it necessarily more specific than this, but it does prove that it's a feasible didactic within your time frame.
And so ways that you can increase the interaction, because that is part of how the didactic is graded is, there are many formats that you can format your didactic. There's been successful submissions that have successfully used panels, small groups, flipped classroom, audience response system, as well as a game show. So really, be as creative as you can and think about how you want to engage your audience members and how you want to communicate that awesome, interesting topic that you have. Back to you, Pat.
Yeah, so other best practices. So this kind of carries into the other topics, which we're going to be asking you when you submit your didactic on the online site. So when you input your individual speakers, one of the things that we look for when we grade these, and this is in our rubric, which is public, is the diversity of speakers. In a sense, this is diversity in the classical sense, but in a more practical sense, this is diversity according to whatever topic you've submitted. So, good examples would be if you're submitting something where you want to have, a vice chairs panel, we'd like to see that you've got vice chairs from several different organizations. If you'd submitted something where you wanted to have time management for the emergency physician, in that case, we'd actually like to see diversity perhaps according to, medical students, residents, and attendings and fellows. It doesn't have to be a diversity in a specific category, but if you are talking to a topic, we'd like to see a group of speakers that have different viewpoints, which they can all add to this. There's of course going to be organizations and kind of topics which are exceptions. And so if, for instance, you have a group of chairs all talking about the same, lifetime experience that they've accumulated, we understand that all the speakers in that case are going to be chairs of different emergency medicine departments, but having them come from different places would still be counted as diversity and still what we'd consider to be beneficial to the didactic itself. When we look at speakers, we look at their experience. So this is credentials and, have they got a doctorate? Have they got, residency training or fellowship training in this area? What's their biography? Have they previously presented at conferences? And all of this is going to strengthen your speaker's submission and you're going to strengthen your speaker's score towards acceptance. So it would be more useful if you've got somebody with a fantastic qualification, which doesn't necessarily have to be years of clinical practice, but if they were, for instance, talking about something like time management, perhaps like a master's of business or something, if they have multiple prior conference presentations, all of which were very well received, and they've had multiple attendees, then, that, or if they're a name that's very well known in the field, this is going to benefit your didactic submission. Somebody has already asked it in the talk, and I've posted it here as well, but there's limits for speaker numbers. The limits are, I will say, these are the rules, but somewhat loosely enforced, is that essentially 2 speakers for 20 minutes or up to 12 for 50 minutes. The more practical limit is really what is your didactic description and what does your didactic plan actually describe. I think you would need to have a very good reason to have more than 12 speakers for anything even beyond 50 minutes. And 2 speakers for 20 minutes. I don't think, particularly given audience questions, that we're going to have any more room for more than a couple of speakers unless it was some kind of a didactic submission that particularly justified it and it was something that requested an exception. So generally speaking, 2 speakers for 20 minutes and up to 12 or 50 minutes would be pretty good limits to be considering for any kind of number of didactic speakers. We do get submissions with a lot of speakers included, and those often get declined. And then you'll get asked for what your topic preference is. This is somewhat of a less important topic for the actual acceptance of your didactic submission, but this does help us with classification and tracking. So we do ask you to, put some thought into it. There's a pretty long list, and I've taken a kind of a screenshot of some of the options that you'll see there, where you get the choice to determine whether your didactic fits better, for instance, under like critical care or under airway. We realize there's going to be some gray area. You do get some little leeway in this. We're not going to grade you on whether we thought you were best under this area or not. But, good examples would be the ones that we've listed here. And we do try and generally speaking, have a pretty broad range of didactic presentations. Anything that fits under the SAEM mission should qualify. We do have a focus on pediatric presentations every year. We always try and encourage those because I think that we receive fewer than we'd really like to present. But other than that, as best as you think your classification is qualified, then please just enter into what you think is right. And AV technical needs, usually speaking, we don't get a lot of these, but every room, as you're probably familiar with if you've been to SAEM before, will include a microphone, a computer, everything has Wi-Fi access. Usually that's enough for almost everything. But if you have a kind of a didactic, which is going to require particular needs, now is the time to say that. So examples would be like if you wanted to have sound to the audience, because you're going to have a lot of Q&A. If you're going to have multiple speakers, you need to have like, multiple panel microphones or something like that. If you're going to be walking around the room and you want to have a lav mic, if you've got a particular kind of a device that needs a particular kind of connector or adapter that you don't think you could provide yourself reliably, please just enter it in here and we'll do our absolute best to accommodate that.
Great.
And
So next, I'll be going over some very important dates. So as you've heard from Patrick already, October 2nd at 5 p.m. Central Time is the submission deadline. So you need to get that submission in before then. There are really no exceptions. Try to submit it at least 24 hours early as well, so that you're not rushing in the last minute and you have all the pieces that you have. So really, October 2nd, put that in your calendars to remind you. The next part is on December 8th, all didactic acceptance letters will be sent out to the person who submitted the didactic. So you'll be notified of your acceptance at that time. And then other important dates to keep in mind is that should your didactic be accepted, April 8th is when all presenter bios and disclosures are due. And this is also important because this is the last day that you can make any changes to who will be presenting your didactic at SAEM24. And 4/15 is when all presentations are due, meaning that you have to upload slides, including at least a title page and conflicts of interest slide to the speaker portal. And on 4/28, that is the last day you're able to edit an uploaded presentation. And I put the asterisks here because you will have the opportunity to upload a new PowerPoint as well at SAEM. However, that is only the case if you have no conflict interest at all to declare for all authors for your didactic. So these are, again, very important timelines to keep in mind, with October 2nd being the most important one to get that didactic submission in.
Important notes here would be that disclosures would include disclosures for presenters with no disclosures, such that in case you have no conflict of interest, it is important to note that you have no conflict of interests by that date. And then the uploading of a presentation at the site should be probably considered to be not plan A. I would think that presentations should be submitted online by these dates, essentially, unless there was a fantastic reason not to have submitted it.
And again, this is kind of what the submission portal looks like. And the last slide just has some really helpful links to get you to the portal submission, our best practices guide with, the verbs that you can use for your objectives to write, and as well as the scoring rubric. And with that, we're open for questions.
Yes, please.
All right. I'm reading some of the chat to make sure. Oh, great. We've been responding.
So yeah, this is an interesting question. So the question is that if a submission is made for 50 minutes, but we just feel like it's got better suited for 20 minutes, can we submit it for the other one? Yes, this does happen. So there are every year very few submissions which come in as 50 minutes, but we just feel like it's just really, we'd love to accept it, but we don't have time in that particular slot, or vice versa. And when we talk personally to the submitting author to say, look, would you consider revising this and presenting it as another one? Because if in that case, we think that we could fit it in. So this is, really like single digits every year in a whole host of 150 accepted didactics that will give this offer. But some of them just are, too good to deny. And we really want to give that chance. So I think that that's not something which is easy to fit into a presentation proposal, but yes, that does happen. And if it has happened to you, then you know that it's just usually rare.
Yeah, and also this webinar will be posted on the SAEM website as well for folks who want the QR codes later on. And I think there was a question about how to, cooperate, engage with other SAEM members if you're part of an interest group. It really depends on, how often you guys are meeting. If you have a meeting coming up, you could, pitch your idea to the group and see who's interested. Otherwise, our community board is a great way to communicate. And if you're looking for members to be presenters, feel free. You can kind of write a discussion board post that will go out to everybody who is registered for the interest group. And if you're part of an academy or, committee, every monthly meeting, there's usually some time dedicated to talking about all the upcoming didactic ideas. And usually there are ways, whether it's like talking with the chair of the subcommittee chair of kind of like education within the academy to get plugged in that way, or even like pitching your own idea to that group. But from my experience, everyone's like really interested in collaborating. And the great thing about SAEM is that we have members from all across the country and different institutions. So, to really help you get the maximum points on the grading rubric, please reach out and collaborate with your fellow SAEM members.
Yeah, that's right. It's not only going to benefit your own chances of getting accepted, but it will also prevent you from submitting, for instance, something which is, too similar to something which is already sponsored by that group to be accepted as a duplicate.
And I would just say, like, one more thing, for example, if you think you have an idea that would be sponsored or should be sponsored by, either a committee or academy. And, if you're not currently part of that academy, it's always good to reach out to either the subcommittee chair or chair to give them a heads up. Because a lot of times, academies do an awesome job like promoting what didactics are coming out and such. And so it's a really great way to collaborate and reach out. And specifically too, if you're a medical student or resident and you want to get the, SAEM RAMS, kind of sponsorship, reach out to any of the SAEM RAMS board members and be happy to connect you.
Yeah, there's even a co-sponsorship system where you can be sponsored by up to two groups. So for, as if you were presenting something which was ultrasound teaching and residency, that could be sponsored by both RAMS and the AEUS.
There's a question regarding, is there a recommendation preferred required audience response system? There's no one that is like required or preferred. It's really based on how you best think will engage your audience members. I know Poll Everywhere has been a popular one that folks use. And other folks have used Jamboards in the past. So kind of all sorts of different types of tools.
Yeah, I've nearly always seen Poll Everywhere used for this. I would defer to Ryan if there was something which SAEM24 was planning to use, which included a hardware solution. But otherwise, I think a Poll Everywhere is the most common.
No, it's the staff. If you just indicate that you want to use one, I would have one in mind, and then staff will reach out and make sure that it works with our on-site facilities.
Awesome. Any other questions? These have been really great.
Okay, well, I guess we're always open to emails if you have anything that you wanted to discuss offline too. And I think both of our emails are pretty findable on the SAEM website.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming to our webinar today. We are so excited to, go through your didactic submissions. And as Patrick said, please don't hesitate to reach out at any time.
That's right. Yeah, we're very proud of all the submissions that we get. We think that everyone does a fantastic job. It's a heartbreaking task every year to go through all of the fantastic things that we get, knowing that we can't present all of them. I wish that we could, but we really look forward to all of your submissions, and we look forward to going through them all and reading all the interesting things that you're doing. And I hope this presentation was helpful to submitting your absolute best didactic. Thanks, everyone.